are back on the 0 hour for a very special interview with a very special guest. Reverend Osagefu Uhuru Sekou has been on the program before talking to us from Ferguson, from the action there in Ferguson. He joins us this time to talk not only about the state of activism in this country, but about a new album he has released entitled In Times Like These. I love the album. It is grounded in a lot of the music that I've loved since I started playing music myself as a kid, including gospel and R&B and so much more. He is an activist. He is a minister. He works in social justice. He is an author, and he is a musician. And he joins us now. First of all, Reverend Sekou, thanks for coming on the program.
It's always a pleasure, dear brother. It's good to finally see you in person.
And same here. Now, I'm going to start, and I'll explain why. I'm going to start as deep as it gets, I think, in a way. Because I have to mention that my mother, who was a lifelong activist, died day before yesterday at the age of 94.
My condolences.
Thank you. And this is my first venture out since then, and but I did not want to miss you. And what do we do as activists, as artists? What do we do to build to last, or does it even matter?
Well, first we want to begin by raising you and your family up in prayer, and I am honored that you would take time after such a hard loss to be with me today, as well as it also talks about your own commitment to the role of the fourth estate in terms of media, holding suzerains and kings accountable. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that commitment. I think that there's a great minister here in Washington named, who passed, named Gordon Cosby, who founded a church called Church of the Savior, some 88 ministries around the world. Ray McGovern, the former CIA analyst, was a member of that church who has chosen to support the freedom struggle. Marian Wright Elderman of the Children's Defense Fund were all members of his congregation. And I was perhaps in my 20s bemoaning to him about the sacrifices of the movement requires and that kind of thing. And he looked at me and he says, I don't understand what you're saying. If the work is not giving you joy, you're doing something wrong. So for me, I think part of in the midst of this particular historical moment, these dark days in our democracy, when a monster is in power, releasing the simmering anti-black, anti-other sentiments that have been long part of the history of the United States of America, that we have to find joy in the work, that I get up every day and I'm blessed to do what I was born to do. I find joy in it. And so whether it's facing down Nazis in Charlottesville or being tear gassed in Ferguson or Palestine, I gain a certain amount of joy, a kind of compassion and clarity that allows me to live to fight another day.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you for that. And when we talk about joy, you know, for me, one of my, yes, my work is a joy to me. But the other source of joy for me is music. I think a lot of my, even the listeners and viewers of this program may or may not know that. You know, I mentioned it in passing, but that's the first thing I did with my life. It's something that speaks to my heart and soul. And so I want to talk now a little bit about your music, because, and I want to talk about it in the context of joy for a second, since you just mentioned joy. You know, I've listened to both your albums now. I want to give them more listens. But one of the songs that I really love is from the first, I think it's from the first album, and it's The Revolution Has Come. And I think I love it because probably it tapped that sense of joy, you know, that what a time to be alive. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for that?
Well, you know, I was actually walking down the street in New York with some Palestinian organizers, part of a group called Existence is Resistance. And I had just been at a conference on the gathering of Lawyers for Black Lives, Law for Black Lives conference. And there's a seminary student named Wesley Morris, who does very powerful work with the beloved community in Greensboro, mentioned actually to me that Drake's album was called What a Time to Be Alive. And I was like, that is an interesting line. And we were just walking, and I just started humming. And speeches, of course, I had talked about We Have Won, taken from the great Desmond Tutu at a moment when a church was surrounded by police, by apartheid police, and he says to them, "You're on the wrong side of history. We've already won." So for me, theologically, that means that what are the ways in which we speak those things that is not as though they were, right? It's to respond to the inquiry by Jean-Paul Sartre, why go on? My grandmother says, why not?
Yeah.
Right, and so I think and so that also goes back into that same kind of notion given to me by those simple people who raised me in a little place called Zen, Arkansas, with 11 houses and 35 people, who used to sing a song that says, "This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me, and the world can't take it away." And so that's to kind of look at the ugliness of the world, the material conditions, and to call them a lie. And so that song emerges both out of that religious sensibility that was given to me as a child, as well as this, although tragic, but beautiful moment of struggle in the United States.
You know, I have so many reactions to that, one of which is, you know, in my own writings myself, I've said that, you know, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a spiritual leader, very well known, who was expressing to me some discouragement. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a theologian, right? But my reaction was, we are honored. We who live in this moment in time have the singular honor of being called upon by history or destiny or God or fate or the universe, whatever you want to call it. We are at a point where what we do makes a difference. And I don't know that any human being can have a greater honor in their life than being called upon by circumstances to make a difference for the people around them and into the future. And I think that's part of what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
Well, first of all, you just preached a sermon, so let us say amen. Secondly, I think that there's a beauty to be able to make something, to make a way out of no way. There's a certain beauty there, and I'm not someone who's like, you know, I don't have an atonement theology, so I'm not saying that suffering is mandated. But if we must, let us do it with dignity and grace. And joy in our hearts, right? And a capacity to believe that another world is possible, and to work as though that is real.
You know, and let's go back to, you know, the revolution has come, and Desmond Tutu, and the idea that, you know, we have already won. People will say, I think, to that sentiment, especially if it's not expressed musically, they might say, well, what do you mean? You know, force, they've got the military, they've got the money, they've got the this, and they've got the that. But you mentioned a song that you heard in Arkansas, a song that I learned from people. I'm not from that area, but a spiritual that I learned from people in Appalachia was, you know, bright morning stars are shining, day is breaking in my soul. Mm-hmm. The notion that at the moment that the awareness that a better world is possible, mm-hmm. the better world comes into being. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying?
Well, also, I would want to point out, right, so that song also takes a reference from an African-American religious idiom, Jesus is a bright and morning star. So mm-hmm. part of what it means to be black in America and to survive, and I think it might be an ethic that spreads throughout the world, is to acknowledge the darkness. You just don't let it have the last word. Right, so you say they got all the guns, they got everything, they can crush us as anymore, they listening to us on our televisions and our cell phones and everything else, and the empire is omnipresent.
Right.
So that's true, but there's a bright and morning star, right? There's something about this ideal of telling the truth about the darkness. So that's the difference between that modern word optimism and hope. Hope is something else, right? Right? There's nothing to be optimistic about, right? If you're optimistic in the face of the darkness that we face at this historical moment, then, you know, you might need to go get checked out. There's no reason to be optimistic, but there's a reason to be hopeful. Because the history of the world is the way in which everyday people who did not matter have stood in the face of an empire and have not bowed down. And so I think that, and even when they are crushed, because you don't organize out of or do the work of social justice because you think you're going to be successful. You do it, it's a form of faithfulness. It's a way in which it's a form of soul craft, right? This is what the great Gordon Cosby taught me, right? It's a way, and my grandmother as well, right? It's a form of kind of soul craft. It's like you're looking at the material conditions, all the reasons may say you should do something that is compromised, but in the face of that, you maintain a level of faithfulness, right? And it's not something that I've achieved, so I don't sit here as some kind of moral agent, but I am saying that something that is bigger than us all is a notion of faithfulness.
And so Hope has a sister, and her name is Faith. And you know, the other thing that I was thinking when you were saying that was, I think we got a little spoiled. Our consciousness got a little distorted by watching so many movies about the heroes of the past. You know, because when you watch a movie about the heroes of the past, whether they were fighting the Nazis or over resisting slavery or anything, I mean, Frederick Douglass or any other great figure who we look back and we say, oh yeah, well, you know, that was going to work out, right? We know while we watch it that it's going to work out. But in their moment, whether it was Nazi Germany or slavery days or Roman Empire, or you just go back through human history, at the moment that people were resisting that, they had no reason for optimism either, did they?
No. And I think also, I'm a lot less interested in the heroes of history. I'm more interested in the heroes of every day. So I begin there. Not, you know, the names necessarily written in the history, but I think about a woman named Miss Roberta, who couldn't read or write. And so my job to her was to read and to write for her, her papers. But she taught me everything about being an intellectual. Come here, boy, and read to me about our people. And she said it with royalty in her voice, her cane, hand on her cane and a snuff bucket to the side. And she had dignity, and these were people who were my heroes. Well, those are the folks that I admire, right, are just simple people like Mr. Ellick, who his house burned down one Friday night, early Saturday morning. You could hear him sawing and nailing, rebuilding his house, and the community coming together, right? And so those kinds of everyday heroes are the kind of ones I think that we should spend a lot more time focusing on. Of course, we want to know the greats of history, like the great Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Anna Julia Cooper, and the list can go on, right? And I even got in the 1900s good yet, you know what I'm saying? And so I think that I want to keep track of those everyday people because I think they offer something else up to, for a number of reasons. One, no one pays attention to poor working class people. They have no lobbyists. They have no presidential candidates, right? All they got is their just sheer fight to survive and live and struggle to raise their children. But also, they're not simply victims, that they have a level of agency and theological genius and philosophical depth that we have to pay attention to. And so when we look at those everyday people, the people around us, our aunts, our uncles, our cousins, that it puts us in a position to be able to have a different kind of conversation about our capacity to survive.
You know, it puts me in mind of a man I met in California who was dying, and he was working to fix his roof. And I talked to him one day. I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm okay with dying, but I'm not sure I can get this roof done for my wife." That, you want to know a hero? That's right. That's a hero.
Yes.
Resist when they try and tell you what you can and can't do. Resist when they say